Welcome, everyone, to Fantasy Foresight, the podcast. We're your hosts and co-founders of FantasyForesight.com, coming to you from the Rambo Fixture Company studios. I'm Ben.
And I'm Jay.
You ready to get rolling, Jay?
You know it. Let's do this.
All right, let's go. Welcome in, everyone. It is Wednesday, August 12th. We've got our guy Steve at FF_encyclopedia back with us from his car tonight. We've got the preview of the quarterbacks and running backs of the AFC North. And once again, Fantasy Foresight, the podcast, is live. How you doing tonight, Jay?
Ben, I don't even know how I'm doing tonight. On one hand, I'm so excited because we're covering the AFC North. I'm jacked up. It's going to be a lot of fun players. I know you guys are looking forward to it. I'm dying to just get into it and maybe have some disagreements and some arguments and get into it about all these fun players, especially my boy Lamar Jackson. On the other hand, just before we jump on, in our league of record, a major trade goes down, and it has me, on one hand, scratching my head like how I could possibly let that happen, and two, how I could possibly let that happen, man. So, yeah, man, that's fantasy for you, is it not? Steve,
oh man,
how are you doing? I'm guessing you had a very interesting day, judging by the fact that you're doing this from your car.
Yeah, I mean, my wife left me, took the kids. No, I'm just kidding. But no, we've been without power. It's been a very interesting day. So you know what? And if it wasn't for the fact this is the AFC North with my Cleveland Browns, I don't know if I'd be out here with the crazy setup if you were to see my car right now. But no, I'm happy to be on, and let me say it's much needed, guys. I appreciate being on.
Oh, we appreciate the effort, attitude, and fight out of you tonight, Steve. And I know it's partially due to the Cleveland Browns. And without further ado, we will get right into it. But before we dive in, just in case this is your first time listening, know that we are speaking in terms primarily in terms of single QB, full PPR redraft formats. All of our ADP data comes from fantasyfootballcalculator.com according to 12-team full PPR settings, and all of our 2019 fantasy stats are full PPR in weeks 1 through 16, and we get those from fantasypros.com.
Hey,
so without that out of the way,
Ben,
let's
also be sure to inform the listeners that some of the content, the bonus content that we'll be covering in today's episode is also available on our website, fantasyforesight.com, under the Foresight Encyclopedia tab, and that is by our guy Steve there, who does some great in-depth research. And this season, he is focusing on play calling trends from all of the teams that we cover that go into our analysis this season. So be sure to check that out.
And I can tell you all firsthand that he's got some fire information for you tonight, because him and I were on the phone chatting it up just in case he couldn't make it. But we put our heads together. He's here for you, and he's got some good stuff for you. So here we go. We are going to go in order of ADP, and we are going to start with the quarterbacks, and then we're going to go with the running backs. First up, drafted in this division of the AFC North, amongst the quarterbacks is Baltimore Ravens quarterback Lamar Jackson, currently going as the QB2 at the 208, behind only Pat Mahomes and in front of Mr. Unlimited and Dak Prescott. And you know, I mean, it's Lamar Jackson going at the 208, and you know he's got the 8th ranked strength of schedule at the quarterback position this year. He's got the 5th ranked O line, both the aggregate projection and total foresight like this guy is QB1. And did he ever take a major step from 2018 to 2019? In 2018, he was just QB 42 in fantasy points per game. Last season, obviously, he was QB1 in fantasy points per game. Did not miss a start. Went 265 of 401. Very low pass attempts that I expect to go up this year. But look at this, 66 completions, over 3,100 yards, 7.8 yards per attempt, 36 passing touchdowns to just 6 interceptions. And, man, we talked about guys like Russell Wilson, and other Kyler Murray, other rushing quarterbacks taking 50 sacks. Lamar only took 23, okay? And it's also important to note that he can also run the ball very, very well. 176 rushing attempts for over 1,200 yards and 7 more rushing touchdowns. QB1 overall, first in consistency weeks 10 to 16, Foresight consistency, 93% of the time this guy was a QB1. He was 14th in pass completion percentage, 12th in yards per pass attempt, first in pass touchdowns, third in touchdown to interception ratio, and first in touchdowns per pass attempt. And of course, he's first in QB rushes. Of course, he's first in QB rush yards, and he was second in QB rush touchdowns. Notable stats from Next Gen Stats. Fourth most time to throw, great offensive line work. Ninth in intended average air yards and 10th in completed average air yards. Third in passer rating, okay? 12th in completion above expectation. And at playerprofiler.com, his best comp is Deshaun Watson. He was 8th in money throws. And since Steve is on, I will leave those red zone statistics to him. But I will say that I do not think he's going to cover that. He was also first in both red zone carries and red zone carries per game. He was second in true passer rating, second in production premium, fifth in air yards per attempt, first in fantasy points per drop back. And he was just on one injury report in week 14 with a quad bruise. Like we talked about previously, the guy's elusiveness and ability to avoid big hits is on a whole nother level. And at the quarterback and tight end positions, there are 3 guys total who are worthy of such steep second round draft equity that you are required to pay in 2020. That list is Pat Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and Lamar Jackson. And that's the end of the list. And it's what Lamar accomplished as a passer in 2019 that has me so optimistic about his continued fantasy dominance. He's now so well-rounded that he can let you choose how he'll beat you / score fantasy points for your team. I am a huge Lamar Jackson fan, and I'd be an even bigger fan if he wasn't a rival franchise QB in my Browns division. But I just honestly don't see how he regresses that much. If the pass touchdowns go down, his rush touchdowns could go up and vice versa. I mean, in 2019, his worst week of the whole year was QB 17. 3 other weeks he finished as QB 10, QB 11, QB 11. But the other 11 games, this guy was top 6 or better. Off of just his running back production, off of just his rushing production alone, he would have been running back 22 in PPR formats, obviously not catching any passes. And off just his passing production without any of his rushing ability, he still would have been QB 12 overall. So Lamar Jackson is a QB1 without his rushing upside. He's a QB1 plus an RB2, all in one wrapped up together. Just let that sink in for a minute.
Yeah, guys, I mean, my goodness. When it comes to Lamar Jackson, he is somebody who I have to admittingly say he has grown on me like tremendously over the past year. Let's just start with his red zone numbers. He only threw 60 red zone attempts last season. And that's only 17th in the NFL. But yet turn that into 24 touchdowns, only behind Mr. Unlimited, as it were. But didn't throw a single interception. And guys, he had the 4th best completion rate down there in that part of the field. Phenomenal in the red zone. And Ben, like you said, he might regress. He will regress when it comes to his touchdown rate, right? I was looking it up. Only Peyton Manning in 2004 in NFL modern history had a better touchdown rate than Lamar Jackson had last season. So stands the reason that that's probably going to come down a little bit. But I think we would all agree on this podcast. I think the Ravens' pass volume in general will rise a little bit. So that'll help offset that pass rate or pass touchdown rate. And then, of course, when you run for 1,200 yards, and you average, 7 point something a carry, you generally will score more than 7 touchdowns. So for me, it's like Jackson, he doesn't even have to rush for 1,200 yards to flirt with double-digit rushing touchdowns. And when you give me that out of the quarterback position, I mean, my goodness, guys, I never want to take a quarterback in the second round, but if there was like no one else that I really wanted sitting there in the second round and I was staring him in the face, it'd be so hard to look the other way. It really would be.
Yeah, guys. And, I know I've jokingly been a detractor of Lamar Jackson's on this podcast, but, you guys have presented the case, and it's tough to argue against. I mean, the guy was dynamic last year, and Ben, like you said, he's multifaceted. He can get you through the air, on the ground, and not just a little bit. He can gash you in both areas and rely on both areas. My only hesitation is, can he do that over the long haul in a career? And I know he's been elusive. But
just 23 sacks and 2 big hits all year.
You're right, and he's going to need to continue to do that. So if he ever loses half a step, then he's in trouble. And I just don't see that happening this year. Now, obviously, he is a premier player. You can't go wrong. There's no argument there. I'm just going to say, it's 2020. We have proven to ourselves that we are not allowed to have nice things. So as great as he is, we saw what happened to Pat Mahomes last year. He has a great year 2 years ago and then picks up a little injury, tails off the second half of the season.
Don't put that evil on him, Ricky Bobby. Just because your precious little Pat Mahomes got hurt doesn't mean that Lamar is going to. Because if Lamar gets called on a QB sneak, he knows how to run it without getting his knee.
No, I'm saying this. Steve has done the consistency studies, and we know how hard it is to repeat at such a high level year after year after year. So did he have an unbelievable 2019? Yes. Can he do it again? I mean, that's really the question. Can he do it again through the air, on the ground, at such a high level, with such consistency again? I mean, you have to take the chance.
I hear what you're saying. And I don't know what the reason is, but I saw somewhere online today that they were talking about the 2004 Madden with Mike Vick on the cover and just showing you some highlights of that and just how everybody used him and how he was just a cheat code. This guy is a better version of Mike Vick. We've never seen anything like this dude before. His ability, he's a better runner than Mike Vick, and he's an elite MVP passer. We've never seen a guy that can do both things as well simultaneously as he can. And I agree with you, until he loses a step or starts taking more hits and getting himself hurt, I don't see, he's not the typical regression case because he can beat you on both sides of the front.
You're absolutely right. So not a surprise that Lamar Jackson kicks off this podcast as the first drafted quarterback in the AFC North. What may be a little bit of a surprise is who is the next off the board. And that is Big Ben Roethlisberger, coming off shoulder elbow surgery, multiple tendons repaired in that elbow. We still don't know really how right he is. All indications are he's good to go, but it's just surprising to me that Big Ben is the next quarterback off this board when you have Baker Mayfield and also the number 1 overall pick in Joe Burrow also in this division. But let's take a look at Big Ben. Right now he's being drafted as QB 16 overall, and we are jumping off a cliff. We are now diving back to the end of the 11th round. So now we're taking late round quarterbacks. We have made the transition rather fast. He is going behind Cam Newton and Daniel Jones, and in front of the two guys I just mentioned, Baker Mayfield and Joe Burrow. They are going in succession at this time. The Steelers have the 11th ranked strength of schedule for quarterbacks in the NFL and the 9th ranked offensive line. Now, his aggregate projection currently is QB 23. Quite a tick back from his current QB 16 price tag, and Total Foresight likes him a little bit better at QB 20, but still behind where he's being drafted. Now, let's take a look at his last 3 years. In 2017, he was QB 8 in fantasy points per game. In 2018, he was QB 2 overall in fantasy points per game. And then last season, we have the injury-plagued season where he was QB 46 in points per game. He only played in 2 games, finished with 57% completion percentage, and no touchdowns with 1 interception in those 2 games. There's no other notable stats, obviously, because he just played in 2 games last season. So it's simple. When Big Ben is healthy, he is a fantasy asset. The question is, coming off what sounded to be like a nasty elbow injury at 38 years old, can he still sling it like he's done his whole career? You don't have to pay a lot to find out, but man, every time I turn around, his ADP price tag is going up to the point where he's now going around 4 other very interesting quarterbacks heading into 2020.
Yeah, Jay, I mean, the greatest point that you made is, yeah, I mean, he's coming off of, was it Tommy John surgery? Like
I don't think it was specifically Tommy John.
It wasn't as severe.
He had 3 tendons repaired in that elbow.
But I mean, either way, like the kind of torque that you have to put on a football to do what an NFL quarterback does, and Big Ben traditionally has had a strong arm. I mean, he's always been able to air it out.
Right.
It's a huge question mark. Now, it's funny, and so in my write-up this week, I feel like I kind of copped out. Pretty much every time I wrote about the Pittsburgh Steelers 2019 season, I was like, well, here's the stats, but we can pretty much just pitch them in the trash, right? Because you have no Big Ben, no healthy Juju for most of the year. Connor was in and out of the lineup all season. So, I have to go back and look at 2018. So when it comes to that, Big Ben going back to 2018, guys. Now, keep in mind, in 2018, he finished pretty high. He might have been QB 2 or 3. He was very high in fantasy football. Now, that came off of leading the NFL in pass attempts. I think he was upwards of like 670, 675 attempts. So the volume certainly assisted him when it came to that. But when it came to his red zone numbers, he wasn't all that great, fellas. His completion percentage was 56.5%, which was only 20th in the entire NFL. Now, while he did throw 20 TDs, which tied for 7th, actually with Baker Mayfield in his rookie season, we'll get to him shortly. Big Ben also threw 4 interceptions, which was the sole leader of worst in the NFL. So and the only reason I bring that up is, and I know Antonio Brown was there, so that's another thing going against Big Ben heading into 2020. But I bring those things up because while he got all that volume and he could pad the stat sheet and be fantasy relevant,
oh, we lost Steve-O.
Oh no.
What?
Oh, there we go. We lost your audio for a second, Steve.
Oh, goodness. So what I was saying is I don't think Big Ben, he's not going to be throwing the ball over 600 times again. And he needed that volume to be fantasy relevant. And, he wasn't really, what I was trying to say with all those red zone stats is he wasn't really that good. If you guys recall, in 2018, the Steelers had Super Bowl aspirations. That was a team that a lot of people were picking to possibly beat the Patriots and come out of the AFC, and they didn't even make the playoffs. And a lot of that was Big Ben just didn't play well. So I think between him tailing off what is the end of his career and coming off an elbow injury, it's a roll of the dice. You could take him really late, see what happens, but, I don't think it's for me, guys.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about quarterbacks in recent history that have been, older, that have come back from injury, I mean, the most recent one is Peyton Manning. That was a neck. A few years before that, you had Tom Brady come back from a knee. This is his throwing elbow, and this is a very severe injury to that throwing elbow, while combined with the fact that he's 38 years old. So and also, Jay, like you said, a couple months ago, this guy was going as like QB 20. So, it's only 4 spots, but it's that matters. And when he's going, a few rounds later, pretty much as a free dart throw at the end of your draft, that's a little bit of a different ball game than compared to the guys that he's currently going around, which are either going to be like streamer platoon options, or it's going to be like, somebody that you're looking to, hit a bullseye on, that you think you're identifying some nice value and you're going to get some QB1 upside. But so I agree. I just think that even though he's relatively cheap compared to what he's historically been, I have a sneaky suspicion that if he's going to do anything good this season, he's going to start slowly, just for a variety of reasons. So I think that it's not going to be very long before you can pick this guy up on the waiver wire or as a free agent, for absolutely free. So I'm going in a different direction, and it starts with our next guy, Cleveland Browns quarterback, Baker Mayfield. He's coming off a very difficult, just like the old Cleveland Browns team is, difficult 2019 season. Heading into 2020, he is going as QB 17 currently at the 1201, behind Daniel Jones, behind Big Ben, in front of Joe Burrow, and in front of Jared Goff. You know what? I am very happy to say that number one, Pro Football Focus has the Cleveland Browns with the 6th ranked offensive line. If you watch Baker last year, a lot of things were his fault. A lot of things weren't. One of those things was the coaching staff. The other thing was the offensive line wasn't that great. When they go ahead and draft Jedrick Wills in the first round, and they bring in Conklin on the right side, it's a night and day upgrade on both tackle positions. So I expect that to make a big impact. I expect Stefanski to make a big impact. And I'm very pleased to also say that he has the best quarterback strength of schedule. Let's go. I like how this is lining up already. It doesn't even bother me that his aggregate projection and total Foresight rank are both QB 19. His metrics earned that last season. I understand that. Compared to a price tag of QB 17, if you're not a Baker May fan, that might send you away. In 2018, he was QB 19 in fantasy points per game. Obviously took a step back last season, was QB 28 in fantasy points per game. Still in a very dysfunctional situation. He did not miss a start. He gutted out some tough injuries. Had 60% passing completion on just over 500 attempts, just over 3,500 yards, just 7 yards per attempt. 19 touchdowns, 18 interceptions, did get in the end zone on the ground 3 additional times. It was just QB 19 overall, just 27th in consistency, but he was QB 16 in consistency from weeks 10 to 16. So it did start getting a little less bad down the stretch. He was 9th in pass attempts. I was surprised to see, but just 37th in completion percentage and 25th in yards per attempt. He was also just 19th in pass touchdowns and 35th in touchdowns per pass attempt. So just total inefficiency, just terrible play all around. I wasn't surprised to see, knowing everything we now know about Freddie Kitchens, to see, according to Next Gen Stats, he was the 9th most aggressive quarterback last year. That very much contributed to those 18 interceptions. But he was 13th in completed average air yards. And I did find it interesting that playerprofiler.com lists his best comp as Drew Brees. I'll take that. So here's what I'm going to say about Big. I still believe in him. I think it's very well documented how he was an overcomer in college. He burst on the scene as a rookie and set the league on fire. I think now the more hindsight we have, the more information that not just Cleveland, but the nation has about what went on last year with Freddie Kitchens and that offense. Like, Todd Monken was out talking about how they didn't even have a game plan. They were just winging it ahead of game time. Like, it was exceptionally bad last year. However, just erase all that for a second and open your mind to this. Baker was a QB1 just 3 times, but was right on the brink of QB1, i.e. streamer territory, another 5 times throughout the year. And he was adapting to Freddie Kitchens' chaos, as evidenced by still being streamer worthy in the second half of 2019, 6 out of 8 times, or 75%. Which was a vast improvement compared to the first half of the season, where he was only streamer worthy 2 out of 7 times, or 29%. I acknowledge and agree that this is a make or break, no excuse season for Baker Mayfield and his NFL career. But I will also say that this is the best version of the Browns organization that he's ever experienced since being draft number 1 overall. And while I'm not sure if Pat Mahomes or Lamar Jackson are super talented enough to overcome all the organizational adversity that Baker has faced in his young career. I'm extremely confident that if Baker was in either of those circumstances coming out of the NFL draft the last 2 years, then no one would be questioning his NFL career outlook like they are now. Remember, he's on his 4th head coach offensive coordinator combo heading into just his 3rd season. I have heard nothing but positive things about Kevin Stefanski from the local media and even national media. Guys who are on record of can't standing the Browns are calling for sneaky good things out of the Browns organization this season because of how well Stefanski is doing his job thus far, and arguably the most challenging circumstances possible. And he's also on the record, Kevin Stefanski, is saying he has loved absolutely everything he has seen from Baker Mayfield this entire offseason, dating back to February when he went and visited Baker at his house to get to know him as a person from day one, and then start to establish, big picture expectations from there. And from everything Stefanski said, he has come through with flying colors. He's got all the weapons in the world, all the strength of schedule in the world, all the offensive line in the world, and now theoretically he's got an offensive scheme that even made Kirk Cousins look good. Let's go, Bake. I'm all in, baby.
I love it, man. And yeah, I mean, my goodness, how much coaching does matter. And you saw it. It was a perfect example last season in Cleveland. And guys, I'm on here to talk a little bit of red zone numbers, so it's going to pain me a little bit, but we're going to get through this. Got to talk about Baker Mayfield's red zone productivity last season, and it was not fine. So, guys, while he did tie for 6th in the NFL in attempts, only Dwayne Haskins, we've had our fun with Dwayne on this podcast, only Dwayne Haskins had a worse completion percentage. Guys, Bake's completion percentage in the red zone was 40.4%. I can't defend that other than the coaching
Freddie's
was
fault.
bad. Well, Ben, you talked about it. They had a lot of long developing pass routes between OBJ and Landry, and it made no sense given the offensive line woes, and won't even get into that. But Baker also, despite the fact whenever you have the 6th most red zone attempts, when you tie for 15th in touchdowns, obviously you're being highly inefficient with those attempts. And then he tied for 2nd for the most interceptions in the entire NFL in the red zone. Now, what I do want to bring up is what he did in 2018, when he did take the league by storm, when he set rookie passing records. In only 13 and a half games in his rookie season, guys, he threw for 20 touchdowns, which in the red zone, which tied for 7th in the NFL in red zone touchdown passes. Didn't throw a single interception, but then also, just as impressively, he was 6th in completion percentage. It literally night and day.
Yeah.
From 2018 to 2019. I mean, night and day, up and down, whatever you want to call it, like exact opposites. And, a lot of it does go to the play calling that was going on, the lack of play calling and preparation. You have a lot of people here in Cleveland that are saying Kevin Stefanski, he does not come off as a first-time head coach. He is highly organized, highly prepared, especially with everything going on in this COVID-19 offseason. And as a Cleveland Browns fan, that's highly encouraging because, man, I have to admit, I was pretty down on the Browns, Baker Mayfield, the entire offense in general, heading out of 2019. So I'm slowly getting lifted back up, slowly getting that energy back. And, for me, I do think that the Cleveland Browns, they're going to run the ball, and that's a good thing. Stefanski's offense, a lot of the plays, they are out of the same formation. They look alike. They use a lot of play action, keeps the defense guessing. I think that's only going to help Baker Mayfield. It'll help all the pass catchers. It's going to help the entire offense. But Baker, maybe in a platoon situation, I do think he's going to be relegated to being a streamer, and you're going to have to catch him on the right weeks. What weeks those will be, we'll have to figure that out as the season goes on. And for all the listeners out there, we'll be here for you for that. But yeah, guys, he's not somebody for me. I actually like Baker. I can't draft him this year in redraft. It pains me to say, but as a Browns fan, I'm actually very encouraged of what I think is going to happen heading into 2020.
I love your guys' cautious optimism about Baker and the Browns this year. It's a little refreshing, but I got to say, like, I'm high on Baker too heading into this season, and it's not because I'm an eternal Browns fan or anything. It's because just last year, he was close to QB5 in ADP. QB5 overall, that's how high the expectations were. So I understand the massive disappointment when he finishes as QB19 overall. I get that. But usually in that case, the pendulum swings way too far the other way, but he's still being drafted ahead of his aggregate projection. So that tells you that people out there still believe that he can be productive as a starting quarterback in fantasy. So, like Ben had mentioned, having the top strength of schedule for the position, a much improved offensive line. I think the COVID offseason actually benefits the Browns almost more than anybody, because the last couple years, all we've heard about is hype and all this attention, and some of it was brought on by themselves in Baker Mayfield and the personalities in that locker room. Well, this season, it's much more quiet because nobody's focusing on that. We're all focusing on what's going on around us in the world. And I think that allows the Browns and this organization to really focus on the task at hand. And, Ben, you touched on it too. This is the best situation not only Baker Mayfield has had since he's been in Cleveland, but the Browns in general. Top to bottom, organizationally, the talent and cohesion is finally there. You have communication amongst all levels, which has not been there probably during our lifetime. There's always been butting of heads. You have a coaching staff that is adequate in seemingly, like you guys were saying, well prepared. So I think this is finally the time that the Browns can start to enjoy the fact that their whole team in general is in a good place. And as Browns fans, I'm happy for you. It's what you've wanted for so long. You've churned through GMs, coaches, quarterbacks trying to find the right combination, and it would seem like you are close to finally having some stability for the future. So I'm in for Baker Mayfield, especially at his price tag. I love it, and I think he's going to exceed expectations this year, even in fantasy.
I agree, man. I think that, like I said, he made Kirk Cousins fantasy relevant. Baker's situation reminds me of how I've viewed Carson Wentz's outlook each of the past couple of seasons, like somebody who's got, who's going to be, I project Baker myself to be very efficient with the football this season. He's got two great tight ends,
yes,
2 great wide receivers, 2 great running backs, and he is going to be schemed into favorable situations for him.
We've talked about the Rams, how they switched to 12 personnel the second half of last season. What team is better suited for that formation? My goodness.
Yeah.
And Steve, to your point, even if they go out there and establish a run and really focus on rushing the football, Bake still has that rushing ability to kind of catch defenses off guard. And also, there's just too much talent around him, receiving talent around him for him to be irrelevant. So I won't, it'll be very shocking and massively disappointing if he's not fantasy relevant at the position.
Well, yeah, and Jay, I do have to say, you do make a good point, as far as when it comes to the talent around him, and that you're right. What we saw Kirk Cousins do in Minnesota, maybe I'm being a little too harsh on the fantasy outlook of Baker Mayfield, but when I think back to his outstanding rookie season in 2018, down the stretch, those final 8 games, his efficiency was off the charts. At that point in time, I think he ended up, he was either first or second. He was in the top couple of guys in both yards per attempt and touchdown rate.
Yep.
And so that's something to where, you think back and you're like, well, that's not out of the realm of possibility. In 2018, he did not have the cast of characters he has around him now.
I was just going to say that, man.
So,
and that was with a much lesser group of weapons.
So yeah, I mean, you guys are, opening my eyes a little bit to that now. Not that it's completely lost on me, but
yeah,
it's, the more I'm sitting here thinking about it, it's like, yeah, if he developed into something that was more than somebody you wanted to platoon or stream, and like he ended up, maybe he's that dark horse sleeper quarterback this year, because we see him every season, and he could be. I mean, there's that quarterback every year, guys, that his efficiency is so ridiculous that it leads him to, one of those top 5 QB finishes. We see it every year.
Let's I knew we were going to talk a lot about Baker, but let's move on from that Oklahoma QB and talk about a Buckeye. All right, shall we? Everybody?
Oh my God! I was like, "What are you talking about?"
All roads lead back to Columbus.
That's absolutely right. All right, so obviously the final quarterback that we will be touching on in this episode is Cincinnati Bengals quarterback and number 1 overall pick, former Buckeye Joey Burrow, who is being drafted as QB 18 behind 2 of the guys we just covered in Big Ben and Baker May. But he's going in front of Jared Goff and fellow rookie Tua Tagovailoa. Wow, yep, you know what I mean. Almost got it out. Yep. The Bengals' strength of schedule for the quarterback position is 13th, so not bad. It's about middle of the road. The problem is their offensive line ranks 2nd worst in the NFL currently. Now, for the rookie, his aggregate projection is QB 22 currently, and Total Foresight actually likes him a tick better at QB 18 overall. So, right now, what we're going to do is go back, way back into time. Per Dane Brugler's 2020 draft guide, in his senior year in high school, Joe Burrow threw for over 4,400 yards and, wait for this, 63 touchdowns and 2 interceptions.
That's why I put that note in there, just because of the 63-2. Not the first time in 2019 the kid's thrown more than 60 touchdowns in a season.
Unbelievable. So now we move on to after he transferred out of Ohio State and went to LSU. That's all right. We'll forgive him for that. His junior year in 13 starts, he had a completion percentage of 58% and threw for a tick under 3,000 yards with 16 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. And he actually added almost 400 yards and 7 touchdowns on the ground. Move on to his senior year, where he really exploded. In 15 starts, his completion percentage improved by almost 20%, where he finished the season with a completion percentage of 76%.
On over 100 more pass attempts, by the way.
Truly unbelievable. Threw for over 5,600 yards. He doubled his yardage output from his junior year to his senior year. And he threw, like Ben had mentioned, he threw for 60 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. Unbelievable. And again, he added almost 400 yards and another 5 touchdowns on the ground. Obviously, we all know he was the Heisman winner, SEC Offensive Player of the Year, first team All-SEC, and the number 1 overall pick in the NFL Draft. He set FBS records for passing touchdowns with 60, total touchdowns with 65 in a single season, had the second best completion percentage behind Colt McCoy's 76.7%, and I'll remind you that Joe Burrow finished with 76.3% completion percentage. Burrow plays with a fiery, according to Dane Brugler, quote, Burrow plays with a fiery intensity of Phillip Rivers, and much of his success comes from channeling his competitive juices in a focused, motivational manner. He shows the ability to quickly identify the void or vulnerable matchup, and let me see if I can get the rest of this quote.
He doesn't miss once he finds it.
Thanks.
End quote.
Thanks. Where'd he go? There you go. All right. Perfect. According to PlayerProfiler.com, his best comparable is Jameis Winston.
Hey, for fantasy purposes, that's just fine.
I mean, the touchdowns are great, obviously. Let's just try to limit those interceptions. Now, as far as I know...
Keep going.
As far as I know, Joey Burrow doesn't need LASIK, so that he does have that going for him. In his rookie season, Jameis passed for over 4,000 yards, and he had 28 total touchdowns and finished as QB 13. And fun fact, In 2 years at Florida State, Jameis threw for 65 total touchdowns. Pretty good. However, last year alone at LSU, Burrow threw for 60 TDs. 60! With the Cincinnati Bengals' awful defense and all those weapons on offense, why won't Joe Burrow be a top 12 quarterback in 2020?
Guys, so I have to say, I've been I don't want to say down on Joe Burrow. There's been certain experts in the industry that are pretty high on him heading into 2020, at least as far as like his possible upside, right? And like for me, I just haven't been able to wrap my head around it because I'm like, you know what? It's a rookie quarterback, COVID-19 offseason, he doesn't get preseason. He can't, like how the quarterback, how are you going to lead? How are you going to gel with your team when you don't have a distanced offseason? And it's just been tough for me to get around. And then, I started doing some of the research for the AFC North, and I see that the Cincinnati Bengals passed the ball 63.6% of their offensive plays, which ranked 5th in the NFL. Why? Do they have any business doing that? Did they not have, no offensive line heading into last season? Did they not have no defense? Zach Taylor certainly didn't do any favors for his Cincinnati Bengals head coach football team by throwing the ball that often. And then when I look at, and this is between Ryan Finley and Andy Dalton, some high caliber football quarterback names, combined for 78 red zone attempts. That was 5th in the NFL, guys.
Jeez.
So,
yeah.
And to me, you have an all-pro caliber running back in Joe Mixon. I understand your line's not good, but I'd rather run the ball behind my bad offensive line than, take sacks and pressured, quarterback throws. But I digress. Anyone who wants to go to fancyforesight.com to the Foresight Encyclopedia tab and read about my thoughts and feelings about Zach Taylor's offense, you are more than free to do so. But the point in all this is, guys, they were willing to throw the ball so much last season under dire circumstances, in my opinion, and there was no AJ Green, forgot to add that in. So you think about it, and it's like, you now have Joe Burrow. AJ Green, for what it sounds like, he's primed and ready to go this season.
Yeah.
They brought in a very kind of AJ Green-like big-bodied wide receiver in T. Higgins out of Clemson, and with their first pick of the second round, so a late first-round pick essentially. This team, if healthy, is loaded, and they're getting some guys on the offensive line back. So the more I was looking through this stuff, especially those red zone numbers, and they were also 9th in pace of play, guys. They ran the 9th most plays of anyone in the NFL, which again, startling because I just viewed them as a dumpster fire last season. So, I wouldn't be surprised if Burrow sets some different rookie records, whether it's passing yards, touchdowns, or both. I think he's going to get the opportunity is the point. And for how late he's going in drafts, I can now get around wanting to actually pull the trigger and draft him. One of my biggest criticisms, but it's also something that I have heard him get praise for, is he's a guy who's willing to pull down the ball and run, and he will use his legs. I feel like watching some film on him in LSU, at his time in LSU, he definitely took some pretty monstrous hits at times where you're like, and you thought it was awesome. It was like, oh, he's a stud. He bounced back up. I just wonder if he's not a little more judicious in the way he runs the ball. Sure. If he'll make it through an NFL season. But outside of that, I mean, my goodness, given where he's going in drafts, it's like, yeah, I can totally get behind him because I think the volume could just be insane, and he has so many weapons around him.
Yeah, we just talked about how, I'm probably one of the few people that thinks that Baker May can be a top 12 fantasy quarterback in 2020, but for very different reasons than Joe Burrow. Baker is going to be more of an efficient quarterback with, really nice touchdown interception ratio off of big plays to OBJ and everybody else, because of what we're going to be able to do on the ground, just at will, just pound teams into submission pretty much. But the reason I say all that is I think Joe Burrow in his rookie season is poised to have an even better 2020 than Baker Mayfield. And the reason is that defense and those weapons and having nice draft equity on the offensive line returned from injury that you didn't get the benefit from whatsoever. I think Joe Burrow is going to have all the volume that he can ask for. Like you said, Steve, they had no business, no reason to be fifth in pass attempts last year. Now they have a pretty good reason to be. And so that not only could sustain, but that could go up a couple of ticks. And I don't see how a guy who has made a career, even in his bad, quote, bad, in his worst season at LSU, his touchdown to interception ratio was 16-5. So, I mean, he's still very good with the football. 60 touchdowns to 6 interceptions in his senior year. I mean, and the reason I wanted to put what he did in high school up there is because, again, insane touchdown interception ratio. The guy knows how to make big plays without compromising the football. And when you're telling me that he's going to get chance after chance to be on the field, and he's probably going to have a positive fantasy game script because he's going to be down all the time, the guy's going to be throwing his lights out. They're going to still be able to run the ball with Joe Mixon, so they'll be able to attack on the ground when they want to, and he'll be able to throw the ball with Joe Mixon too. So Joe Burrow could be a top 6 quarterback this year. Last year, Lamar went undrafted. We all know what he did. And Pat Mahomes went undrafted the year before that. We know what he did in 2018, and I think Joe Burrow fits that mold about the guy going outside the top 12 who could be very high up that list at the end.
I'll tell you what, man. I'm glad you said it because I'm always surprised by how low he's going, and he's the number 1 pick in the draft. You know, usually a guy like that has so much hype around him. You almost want to be like, guys, cool your jets. Like, you know, he's a rookie.
AJ Green coming back cannot be overstated.
But it's not there for him. He, you know, I mean, look where he's being drafted. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't know if it's because he's in Cincinnati or what the deal is, but I don't feel like all that hype that you typically expect from a guy who goes number 1 overall and is going to be a starter day 1. It's just not there. It's nuts. But I'm with you. And let me leave you with this on Joe Burrow. We are numbers guys. We play a numbers game in fantasy football, and we want to quantify success so that we can try to predict success in this game. However, watching Joe Burrow in college with my eyes, I saw one notable thing, and that is his vision downfield when a play breaks down. You know, usually when guys get outside the pocket, they're looking for their closest receiver, their closest outlet to get rid of the ball. Joe Burrow, maybe unlike everybody else with the exception of Aaron Rodgers that I've watched, can identify targets open further downfield to a point where he did it with such regularity, it seemed like second nature. And in the back of my mind when he was selected by Cincinnati with this atrocious offensive line and defense, knowing he's going to have to throw the ball a lot, and the chances are plays will break down with regularity, it actually gave me, you know, a little bit of a silver lining saying he may fit this situation perfectly. So I'm with you. I think that he is going to surprise, especially compared to his ADP.
Yeah, I mean that's 3 for 3. He's somebody I'm scratching my head about why he's going, you know, as QB 18.
Honestly, man, it confuses me why Baker May and Joe Burrow, with their upside heading into this season, are going behind Big Ben and all of the question marks that surround him.
Yeah, that's you know what it is. It's hindsight versus foresight, and that's what we're here for, Fantasy Foresight. And you know, that rounds out the quarterbacks in the AFC North. And you know what? We've got a pretty exciting group of running backs as well. And the first running back off the board in this division is Cincinnati Bengals running back Joe Mixon, going at the RB11 at the 202 behind Miles Sanders and Kenyon Drake, and right in front of Nick Chubb and Austin Eckler. The Cincinnati Bengals running backs have the 7th ranked strength of schedule this season, but the 2nd worst ranked offensive line. But they are getting some pieces back from injury that they put high draft capital in, like we said. He is Foresight aggregate projected RB12 heading into the season. Total Foresight only likes him as RB22. In the last 3 seasons in fantasy points per game, Joe Burrow hasn't been too bad. And whoa, what's that, Steve?
Hey, sorry about that, guys. I'm transitioning back into my house. I have power again.
Oh, yeah, power again. Now. There we go.
Yep.
Right. So in 2017, Joe Mixon, RB31 in fantasy points per game. In 2018, with some increased passing volume, he improved that to RB9 in fantasy points per game in 2018. And last season in 2019, he was RB22 in fantasy points per game. Did not miss a start. 975 yards on the ground, just 3 rushing touchdowns, and had less than a 4 yards per carry average. And then I talked about in 2018 how that RB9 fantasy points per game was highly propelled by passing volume. He didn't get that last season. Just 34 receptions on 44 targets for 273 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. He did end up, however, as RB17 overall, was just 21st in consistency overall. However, from weeks 10 to 16, Joe Mixon was your RB5 in consistency. And in Foresight consistency that measures a player's outlook throughout the season and how he trends, he was RB11 in Foresight consistency. He was just 30th in top 6 percentage, did not have a good season in that regard, but he was tied for 16th in RB1 percentage and tied for 26th in RB2 percentage. He was 7th in rush attempts, 13 in rush yards, but just 32nd in rushing touchdowns. And he was also just 28th in running back targets. So a lot of low production. Well, not even that low. He's a middle of the road RB2, and he's just getting terrible volume. And then when I look at him at playerprofiler.com, his best comparable is Zeke Elliott. I did not know that. And that got my attention. That's about their workout metrics, their size, and their capabilities, Jay.
Sure,
I mean,
I get you.
I hear what you're saying with your face, but you just love Buckeyes way too much. I'll leave the red zone numbers to Steve-O now that he's settled and not making me dizzy with his screen anymore. And tell you that Joe Mixon was 12th in total touchdowns last year. And he was 1st in evaded tackles, 4th in juke rate, 8th in dominator rating, 2nd in yards created, 8th in yards created per touch, and he was on 0 injury reports in 2019, Jay. Joe Mixon played behind a poor O-line last season and was still 5th in consistency from weeks 10 to 16. So he's already shown that he can pretty much do it all by himself with no support. But now he's getting a fully healthy A.J. Green, a drafted T. Higgins, and a brand new franchise quarterback who sure looks and sounds like the real deal to help, number 1, take some defensive focus off Joe Mixon, and number 2, help him get even more goal line carries by moving the football. Another thing that will help him is that terrible Bengals defense, because it's going to get him plenty of volume, because he will get passing volume this year with Joe Burrow at the helm. Just look at Clyde Edwards-Helaire and what he did at LSU last season. So whether it's a positive or negative game script, I like Joe Mixon in 2020. And while there are a few guys I like more than him in this group of running backs, I will acknowledge that, I don't mind him at this price tier whatsoever.
So I will say that as soon as I get done with my take here, I'm going to drop off and rejoin via MacBook instead of my cellular device. I think everyone will appreciate that. But no, yeah. I mean, Ben, obviously you make a lot of great points. And when it comes to Mixon, you're right. Like, I don't mind him where he's going. For me, I don't necessarily prefer it. I won't say a lot. I was definitely higher on Mixon. One of the things that was alarming to me is, like we just talked about with Burrow, what makes me kind of like Burrow and buy into that whole passing offense is, man, just what were they doing underutilizing their running back last season with a talent like Joe Mixon? Now, he still was 12th in the NFL with 40 red zone attempts. He did only score 5 times. And guys, when it comes to his goal line touches, he had a dozen of those, only punched in 4. That 33% conversion rate on those goal line attempts for guys that had double digits in 2019, Cleveland Browns running back remain to be named, and Frank Gore were worse in 2019. Now, do I think that's Joe Mixon's fault? Not necessarily. We know the line was bad. Quarterback play is bad.
And defenses knew that too.
Exactly. It's like, so what are you going to key on? So while I think there's room for that to grow, for me, the biggest question is, will they be down there in the red zone goal line area enough? And will Zach Taylor feed the beast the ball, which he should? Now, he has, come out and said as much, which has encouraged me. But yeah, I have no problem with Mixon where he's going right now. Like I said, I was more in until doing the research leading up to this podcast, where I was just astounded by how much they threw the ball. Like, didn't matter where they were on the field, despite some very adverse circumstances.
See, all right, good. We'll have our first disagreement, because I'm not a Mixon. I mean, he's a fine football player, but in fantasy, I am just not a big Mixon guy, Ben. And I'll tell you why. You mentioned it. He was 7th in rushing attempts overall, which is very impressive, but he only turned that into RB17 overall and RB22 in points per game. And then Steve touched on it. The passing volume is the passing volume versus rushing volume overall on that team is a little bit concerning, when the fact is he wasn't involved in the passing volume or in the passing game. So the fact that the team prefers to pass the ball first, he's not involved in that area. And even when he does get good rushing volume, he can only turn that combination into RB17 or RB22 in a season when he didn't even appear on an injury report. I don't know if he can do that again. So I feel like RB11 is ahead of his ceiling. Like, a middle.
I think RB17, where he was last year, is his floor.
Okay,
and he didn't
fine.
have AJ Green, and he didn't have Joe Burrow last year.
Right, but he still has a terrible offensive line and a rookie quarterback.
Improved.
And Zach Taylor as a coach, where we don't know what he's going to do. So the fact that he did get good volume on the ground, he wasn't involved in a prolific passing game, are both deeply concerning to me. Now, can his touchdowns go up? Yes. But that's why I think that RB11 could be his ceiling. RB17 may be his floor, but if that's the case, RB11's got to be his ceiling.
And like I said, Jay, I'm going Miles Sanders. I'm going Kenyon Drake. I'm going Austin Eckler, and I'm going Nick Chubb.
All right, good. I'm glad you brought up.
So for me, he's not RB11 for me. I mean,
Right.
so I said, I chose my words carefully when I said I don't mind him in that price tier.
Yes.
But I like him at the end of that price tier,
Okay.
and definitely not above the two guys that I just.
You brought up the next guy on our list, and that is the person going after him in drafts, and that is Nick Chubb. And there's a lot of debate about Nick Chubb in fantasy and amongst us even. Nick Chubb is being drafted as RB12 with the 3rd selection in the 2nd round in drafts currently. And as we had mentioned, he's going behind Kenyon Drake and Joe Mixon and in front of Austin Eckler and Aaron Jones. As we had mentioned, the Browns actually have the 5th best strength of schedule for the running back position and the 6th ranked offensive line. A great combination. Currently, Nick Chubb's aggregate projection is RB13, in line with where he's being drafted. And Total Foresight likes him actually exactly where he's being drafted at RB12. Take a look at his last 2 years in the NFL. He's been RB22 and RB10 last year in fantasy points per game. That's fantasy points per game for the entire season, even when Kareem Hunt was back. Last season, he did not miss a start. He finished with over 1,400 rushing yards for a 5.1 yards per carry average and 8 touchdowns. He did also get in a little bit in the passing game. He had 35 catches on 47 targets for a little under 300 yards and did not get in the end zone through the air. He finished as RB8 overall. As I had mentioned, he was RB10 in points per game. He was 14th in consistency. He was just 20th in consistency from weeks 10 to 12 with Hunt involved in the
weeks
offense.
10 to 16.
Yes, you're right. Weeks 10 to 16. He was 21st in Foresight consistency, 12th in top 6 percentage, 13th in RB1 percentage, and 18th in RB2 percentage. He was the 11th most efficient north-south runner. He had the 4th fastest play of the year at 21.95 miles per hour on an 88-yard rushing touchdown. Reminds me of high school. Of myself in high school, I should say. If he was running through a school zone, he could have gotten caught. He could have gotten a speeding ticket. Nice note, Ben. Yes. Faster than the speeding limit. Yes. And according to playerprofiler.com, his best comparable was Jonathan Stewart. Hey, all right. J. Stu making the podcast. I like it. All right. Some other notable stats. He was 11th in true yards per carry, 1st in big runs, 10th in big run rate. I don't know how he can be 1st in big runs and 10th in big run rate. I guess that has to do with production or volume. 2nd in evaded tackles, 10th in juke rate, 12th in dominator rating, 2nd in yards created, and he doesn't even have an NFL injury profile. How's that for durability? Okay, let me give you some notes. Per Pete Smith on July 22nd at SI.com, he feels that everything is lined up for an even better 2020 season for Nick Chubb, saying, quote, "The Browns have only improved his situation, adding 2 new tackles with Jedrick Willis in the 2020 NFL Draft and Jack Conklin in free agency. They also brought in Austin Hooper and traded for fullback Andy Janovich. The presence of Kareem Hunt should not dissuade anyone from drafting Chubb, as the Browns appear to be taking a best 11 approach to offense. In other words, Hunt may get carries from time to time, but he may also line up as a third receiver, allowing them to put both on the field," end quote. Listen, I may be in the minority now because of the whole Kareem Hunt situation, but I'm all in on Nick Chubb as a running back, and I think that they can both have clearly defined roles in an offense, almost like what we saw in Chicago 2 seasons ago, where they produced both an RB1 and an RB2 in the same offense.
Jay, I just want to say you're not alone, brother.
Yeah, all right, Steve-O! Woo!
No, I'm more and more, the more I've looked into what the Browns did last season versus what Minnesota did last season, to how Kevin Stefanski's offense is, I never was low on Chubb, but I'm actually like more high on him than I probably ever have been. And some of that just goes right back to Minnesota Vikings. They ran the ball a lot. I think they were 3rd in the NFL in rushing attempts, only behind San Francisco and Baltimore. So we're talking pretty high rushing volume team. But they ran the ball an NFL league leading 90 times in the red zone. So Nick Chubb last season in the red zone ran 50 times, which did tie for 3rd in the NFL. Definitely a high clip. Only 6 touchdowns, low efficiency. Now, when we talk about his goal line efficiency, I got to tell you guys, I wish I could tell you there was someone worse, but there wasn't. Nick Chubb had 15 goal line totes, which tied for 3rd in the NFL, only 2 touchdowns. I'll tell you, I went back and looked at 2018, 2017. That's the worst efficiency, at least in the last 3 years. But I also put a lot of that on Ben. You'll agree. You watch those games. The play calling around the goal line was so terrible, so predictable, so atrocious. It was just horrific. It's nothing against Nick Chubb. It's not that he's not an efficient goal line runner. If you look at his 2018 rookie season, he was just fine. So what I'm trying to build up to is this Cleveland Browns team, they're going to run the ball. They're going to run the ball a lot. They're going to run the ball a lot in the red zone, especially around the goal line. Nick Chubb, if that efficiency goes up to just a mediocre number, the amount of touchdowns he's going to score, it's going to go up from 8, probably be somewhere closer to a dozen. He almost led the league in rushing last season, despite, I love you, Bake, right there in my background. Bad quarterback play, bad coaching, bad offensive line, almost led the NFL in rushing. So I just feel like, he's going to get high-quality rushing attempts. He's going to capitalize on those. If Nick Chubb is healthy next season, I don't see any reason why he's not approaching 1,500 yards and 12-plus touchdowns, which I think even in PPR, even if he doesn't catch a lot of passes, we would all agree that would probably merit a top 5 running back. So I know I'm a lot higher on him than probably a lot of people are. And I do have to say, hey, Kareem Hunt will be I would draft Kareem Hunt too. I'd like to have both those guys. Insurance, especially in this, COVID off season. But man, oh man, I love me some Nick Chubb.
Thank
I'm sorry,
you,
guys.
Steve.
I'm not trying to be a homer, but I love me some
Steve.
Nick Chubb.
And I'm not a homer. Before Ben jumps in, I know he's going to point out the whole end of the year.
You don't know anything, number one.
Weeks 10 to 16. But we also need to say, yes.
Freddie Kitchens, who's
exactly. Thank you.
I don't want to call anyone names. I'll just say he's a doo-doo head.
Timeout. Number one. You, Jay, need to put some respect on Kareem Hunt's name. Comparing him to Tariq Cohen is a joke, sir.
Well,
it's a joke.
Hey, I'm just saying, it's possible to have 2 high-end fantasy-relevant running backs in the same offense.
More appropriate comparison would have been Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara from a few years back.
Wait. Old Mark Ingram. Okay, fine.
I just had to take you off of your high horse for a second. I do need to, before I give you my assessment on Nick Chubb, I do need to give you the reason, I think the best and only reason, cause for concern with Nick Chubb heading into 2020. There is only one football. There is only so much of it to go around. And Nick Chubb was the 7th most consistent running back from weeks 1 to 8 last year, compared to the second half of the season when he was the 20th most consistent running back once Kareem Hunt was involved. Yeah. However, I have been very consistent about what I have said about Freddie Kitchens and how historically bad he was. And Steve's right. I did watch the plays. Steve's right. I do understand that he was the lowest in goal line efficiency. Part of that's because he got so much opportunity. Another thing is, I don't know, Steve, if you just mentioned it now or if it's from our previous conversation, you've told me how much Kevin Stefanski targets his running backs in his offenses. So here, my point to all this is whatever Nick Chubb loses in the way of additional Kareem Hunt involvement, he's going to make up for, number one, in just the addition by subtraction of no more Freddie Kitchens. That's number one. Number two, now you have a plus play caller in Kevin Stefanski. Number three, Kevin Stefanski in his running back usage volume is way up there. And then you've got the strength of schedule. And then you've got the offensive line. And then you've got improved play from Baker May. So don't worry, Jay. I'm in on my boy Chubb too, brother.
Thank you. I don't want you to be a doo-doo head too.
Hey, Ben.
All I do is hit you with the cold, hard truth, and I have just been noting the fact of Chubb's very different numbers from the first half to the second half, but Freddie Kitchens to blame, just like every other bad thing that happened with the Browns last year.
Hey, Benny, I will say I'm glad you brought it up because right now in this podcast, we're talking about, Nick Chubb, Joe Mixon, this range of players, these are make or break kind of guys for people drafting out there. So, like, hey, let's spend a little bit of extra time on these guys. So I'm glad you brought up that. Yeah. So I reached out to Benny. I'm like, I might not be able to make the podcast because I don't have power. And then, went out to my car. It's a great idea, Ben. But, and we were talking about it and it was like, well, Minnesota, they actually targeted their running back 7th most in the NFL last season. And I was highly surprised because I just assumed that Minnesota, based on red zone, and we'll get to that division next, based on red zone activity, I thought, well, they targeted their tight ends so much in the red zone, did Minnesota. They must not have targeted running backs. No, they were 7th most. Browns were 9th last season. So I think that's highly valuable information when you look at the kind of offense Stefanski is going to bring into Cleveland heading into 2020, because the guy who's on the field the most, which I project to be Chubb, just based on default, he will get a decent amount of targets and reception. So he'll get that. But then obviously that is what we can bank on Kareem Hunt having week to week, some kind of standalone flex-worthy PPR value. This is an offense that is predicated around using the running backs out of the backfield. So very happy you brought that up. I just wanted to, drop those specific stats because, it is important if you believe in one guy or the other or both.
Yeah, with an uptick in running back volume, even sharing the load with Kareem, I mean, Nick Chubb could easily get another 47 running back targets this season.
Okay, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Before we move on, he was RB10 in fantasy points per game last season and RB8 overall. Do you think any loss in production, do you think his touchdown efficiency increase will equal his loss in production, or will he actually score more in fantasy this season?
The efficiency from just a per touch basis based on Stefanski's scheme, and then I think that's also going to lead to even more red zone trips, and that's going to lead to increased intelligent play calling in the red zone,
which is
going to lead to increased rushing touchdowns.
Do you think he'll have a net positive change?
Yeah, I think.
Okay,
yeah.
So then if he was RB8 overall last season and he's going as RB12 right now in drafts, that is just absurd if he can actually improve upon that and finish inside the top 8 in fantasy. Before
I did all of my statistically proven research for this podcast, to your surprise, Jay, of this list, I only would have taken Kenyon Drake over Nick Chubb. After the research, I'm taking nobody over Nick Chubb.
I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. Makes me happy.
See,
all right.
Don't worry. I am objective and a numbers guy at the end of the day, and I just want to get it right. Yeah. I don't care about being right.
The listeners are going to be like, "Oh, he's so objective. He took he moved a Browns player up his board." But you went in with him down, so it is what it is. All right, let's move on. I'm dying to know. We got a Steeler up next. Let's see where this conversation goes.
Yeah, Pittsburgh Steelers running back James Conner well, here's the thing. James Conner, he's going at the top of the third. He's going at 302 as the RB16 behind Aaron Jones and Todd Gurley in front of David Johnson and Chris Carson.
I think you pronounced that name wrong. It's 50 touchdown Aaron Jones.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah.
In the number one RB in Jay's heart, Aaron Jones.
Jay's crazy hair color, Aaron Jones.
Now, listen to this. For any Steelers running back, they have the second ranked running back strength of schedule. Whether you think that's relevant for James Conner, whoever is behind James Conner, that's pretty notable. They also always have a nice O-line in Pittsburgh. Currently, it is ranked 9th at Pro Football Focus.
So, real quick, what I'm gathering from these stats are that the AFC North just doesn't play run defense. They just defend the pass. Because they all have fantastic strength of schedules.
It's the other opposing divisions that they're playing. I know. And RB20 is James Conner's aggregate projection compared to his RB16 price tag. Total Foresight likes James Conner as RB16.
Total Foresight, go home. You drunk.
Sigh. Yeah. You're sleeping on the couch tonight, Total Foresight. In 2018, in 2017, James Conner was RB bad in fantasy points per game. It was triple digits bad. In 2018, he was RB6 in fantasy points per game. I will say I was surprised to see that he was RB16 in fantasy points per game last year. Better than I thought I remembered. He missed 5 games. And he still got 116 carries, averaged 4 yards per carry, almost 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. He added some very nice passing volume for 11 games, 34 receptions on 38 targets for 251 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was RB31 overall again, talked about the missed time. He was 26th in consistency. Down the stretch concerns me, 45th in consistency, weeks 10 to 16. He was 34th in Foresight consistency. He was 25th in top 6 percentage, 21st in RB1 percentage, and 24th in RB2 percentage. This is all a far cry from RB16. He was RB16 in fantasy points per game. So far, everything else, every other metric, not so great compared to that RB16 price tag. When we go to playerprofiler.com, James Conner was 14th in production premium, 5th in dominator rating, and 14th in juke rate. Now, here's where the train comes to a screeching halt. At playerprofiler.com, they've got this thing called injury probability and this other thing called fragility rating. James Conner is number 1 in injury probability and number 8 in fragility rating at the running back position. There's a lot to like about James Conner, the person, the player, and his situation as a fantasy running back over there in Pittsburgh. And for the first 4 to 6 weeks, he may be a top tier running back 1 for you. But I just can't get past the injury probability and the fragility rating. I mean, for a guy you're drafting to be a season-long cornerstone of your team at the 302, I mean, even though he's a Steeler and I'm a Browns fan, I love his story and I want to see him be able to stay healthy. But I just can't bring myself to take this gamble at the 302. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, man, I hear you, Benny. Like, I feel the same way. And I also, it's one of those things where it's like, I feel a little dirty not wanting to be behind James Conner. Like, he's, man, what, just an incredible person, an incredible human being, his story. And obviously, I've always rooted for the guy. I'll continue to root for the guy. But you said it best. The 302, guys, an early third-round pick. Like, in this week's write-up, I wrote, like, if you're willing to take that risk, then, hey, he might be the guy for you. More power to you. It's not my game. That's not what I like to do. But, man, oh, man. And, hey, like I said about the Steelers quarterback red zone situation with, Big Ben. Well, last year, Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges, throw it out the window. Same thing last year. I mean, Conner last season only had 13 red zone rushing attempts. Highly efficient with 4 touchdowns, but I mean 13. It's because while he might have played 10 games, guys, I mean, let's face it, he kind of played 10 games, and in some of those games he barely participated in. So let's go ahead and look back at 2018. Now, he was healthy leading up to, I think it was week 13. He missed fantasy playoffs for everybody. Very disappointing that season, but he was a guy that people picked up for free, so it's kind of hard to complain about that. But to give our listeners out there a little bit of a feel for what could be if Connor's healthy and Big Ben's healthy and Juju's healthy and they have Claypool or Washington rise up as a WR2. Never touch Antonio Brown, but at least rise up as a WR2. Make this offense what it was in 2018. James Conner, he had 15 goal line attempts back in 2018. He punched in 9 of those for touchdowns. That tied the NFL for the league lead, guys. So, obviously, he was valuable, highly valuable in 2018. And I think that's where you see that RB16 price tag, is I think people are still kind of hoping for and chasing that. And like you said, Ben, I don't like, outside of, I love Todd Gurley in this range because the last 3 years he's never not finished any lower than RB12. So RB16, that's a great value. But I look at all the other guys on this list and I can't really get behind them, and I just can't do it at 302, guys. And Jay, I know how you feel about injury prone fellas. So
yeah, Steve, you really summed it up nicely. Just both you guys really did. Just you want to root for this guy, and we will root for him. But in fantasy, 302 is way too expensive for the amount of risk that he carries. And honestly, this whole offense in my mind, carries a ton of risk. The wheels could fall off the bus very easily. Like you were alluding to, Steve, a lot of things have to go right for a lot of these skill position players to have success. And I just don't want to bank on that, especially at this price point.
I mean, a game within the game before we move on. If you get in a position where you like James Conner or you feel stuck in draft James Conner, I'm telling you what, I would try to hot potato trade him as quickly as I could. Let him get a couple of nice games.
Sure,
First couple of weeks of the season,
Sure.
probably going to be a nice fantasy performer for you. But, you know, last year, remember, down the stretch, weeks 10 to 16, just 45th in consistency in that time. I just worry about his trending, you know, throughout the year.
All right, let's move on to our next running back. He is RB25 on the books. He's number 1 in Ben's heart, and also RB2 on his own team, and that is Mark Ingram, going as RB25 currently in drafts, in the middle of the 4th round now, behind David Montgomery, Devin Singletary, and in front of Raheem Mostert and Kareem Hunt. Now, the Ravens have the 6th best strength of schedule for the running back position and the 5th ranked offensive line, so a great combination for success, as they typically do in the running game. His aggregate projection is currently RB24, right in line with his price point. Total Foresight giving the man a lot of respect for his career and also that offensive line and run game, because right now he's ranked as RB9. So the last 3 seasons, and you'll see a little bit of why he's ranked so high. In 2017, he was RB7 overall in points per game. In 2018, he was RB26, and last year he was RB11 in points per game. Last year, he did not miss a start. He finished with over 200 carries for over 1,000 rushing yards and a 5 yards per carry average, tacked on 10 touchdowns. He even added almost 250 yards through the air and another 5 scores. He finished RB9 overall. He was 10th in consistency, 6th in consistency from weeks 10 to 16. He was 10th in Foresight consistency, 8th in top 6 percentage. That means only 7 running backs finished in the top 6 at the position more frequently than Mark Ingram. He was 16th in RB1 percentage and 12th in RB2 percentage. An amazing floor. He was also the 2nd most efficient north-south runner. A ton of great data there. From playerprofiler.com, he was 4th in total touchdowns, 7th in true yards per carry, 8th in yards per touch, 12th in breakaway runs. Who knew the old man still had it in him? 15th in breakaway run rate, 9th in evaded tackles, first in juke rate. What? Holy smokes. 14th in yards created, 17th in production premium. The easiest stat to suffer regression from one fantasy season to the next is running back touchdowns. I could not believe Mark Ingram was 4th in total touchdowns. 15 from weeks 1 to 16. And I gotta say, I'll be shocked if he musters half that number in 2020. Number 1, Ingram has been durable, but he's now almost 31 versus a fresh rookie running back. Number 2, Lamar is a rushing threat at the goal line. That's who I meant was the best rushing back on the team, fellas. Number 3, they took Dobbins in the 2nd round.
Well, there's also a Buckeye now, so you never
now we know who's going to be the best running back on this team. Probably the best player on this team, but I digress. Number 4, they still gave Gus Edwards 24 red zone touches and 5 goal line carries in 2019, and he's still hanging around. You know how this team is. They're running back by committee always. So if you're telling me there's a younger, faster, 2nd round rookie running back going 3 rounds later in fantasy drafts, I'm sure not taking the 31-year-old running back in the 4th round with that guy sitting behind him.
Man, Jay, we always joke about it. I hate agreeing with everything that comes out of your guys' mouths.
I know.
And I do. I can't understate that anymore. Like, yeah, I agree with absolutely everything you had to say. Like, you can't take Mark Ingram in the 4th. Like, even if you're going,
as he's been.
Precisely. Even if you're going 0 running back and you're like, well, I'll get off to a good start with him. It's like, so what's your auxiliary plan? Are you also taking J.K. Dobbins like a little bit later? But then you're wasting 2, starter-worthy draft picks on one position. And, yeah, I mean, just to give, because I'll go over the red zone numbers for our listeners here. Like, Ingram, he was sensational, obviously, when it came to his red zone productivity. I mean, he had 40 attempts, which while that only tied for 12th in the NFL, just like Joe Mixon, right? Joe Mixon had 40 attempts. Well, Joe Mixon had 5 touchdowns. Ingram had 10. And then when you look at their goal line touchdowns, again, Ingram doubled that. You can't understate what it means to have a talent like Lamar Jackson as your quarterback when it comes to how that opens up rushing lanes for your running backs, especially a guy like Mark Ingram, who's a very solid vision-oriented north-south runner that he is. Perfectly suited for the offense. Now, we also saw how well J.K. Dobbins can do at Ohio State University in a similar style offense. And with the Ravens giving him a first-round grade, fellas, I mean, to where they're like, we cannot pass on this kid. We're drafting him. You have to take that into consideration. And what I wrote about this week was like, hey, you're either, people are either on the side of Dobbins will take the job eventually, or, Ingram will keep the job. And it's like, well, either way, in the early part of the season, you can bank on Ingram, but we all know, I think we could all agree that at some point in time, this is going to become Dobbins' backfield, or at least he'll be the guy that's getting 65% of those carries. And they are so valuable in this offense.
All right, let me throw you this. Let me throw this at you real quick, Ben and Steve. This is one of the best running offenses in the league year to year, and you love having a piece of this rushing attack because it's so prolific. But take a look at the rushing numbers from last season. Ingram had 202 carries. Lamar Jackson had 176 carries. Gus Edwards had 133 carries. Justice Hill had 58 carries. Now they're adding J.K. Dobbins to that mix. We've talked about having too many mouths to feed. This is too many mouths to feed just running the football. Like, it's tough to trust, especially in the 4th round.
That's it right there, Jay. The 4th round makes it what's just out of the question, because Ingram has been a very solid fantasy performer for several years.
Yes.
And, he's in the best situation of his career in Baltimore. Now, I will say that at 5 yards per carry and like 9.5 yards per reception, I don't think at 31 years old, he's going to be any more efficient than that. I don't know that that's going to drop, but I don't know that he's going to get 231 total touches either. I think that if he leads, that's an if he leads this backfield in total touches, it's going to be barely, because like Steve said, you made the point, you stole my point from me, Steve, in that, and then I just completely blanked on the train of thought.
That's all good.
Yeah. So, that's it. That they had a first round grade on J.K. Dobbins. They did not go into the draft planning on drafting a running back there, or maybe don't even know if they were going to be drafting a running back at all. Probably because Mark Ingram has an out in his contract next season, and he would be 32, in December of 2021. So I just really think that, because they view him so highly, and because they still, even though at a value, invested the draft equity that they did, I think that Dobbins is getting nearly a 50-50 timeshare in this backfield almost from day one.
All right, let's move on to the second piece, and we've touched on it greatly in the Cleveland Browns backfield, and that is, oh, that's you. I'm sorry. I'm stealing your thunder. I'm stealing your thunder.
That's all right. And I'm happy to move on to a couple of running backs where I have zero conflict about. And it starts with Cleveland Browns running back Kareem Hunt, currently going as RB27 at the 506, behind Mark Ingram, behind Raheem Mostert, and in front of guys like DeAndre Swift and Cam Akers. Like we said with Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt benefits from having both the 5th-ranked running back strength of schedule and the 6th-ranked offensive line. He is projected as better than his current ADP as RB25 versus that ADP of RB27. And Total Foresight likes this guy as RB15. Don't forget, 3 years ago, 2017, RB5 in fantasy points per game. 2018, RB8 in fantasy points per game. Last year, in limited time, in just 8 games, he was RB27 in fantasy points per game. He had a 4.4 yard per carry average with 175 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. But he was primarily targeted through the air. He got 40 targets and hauled in 34 catches. Great catch rate there. 250 receiving yards and another receiving touchdowns at a 7.4 yard per reception average. Again, in half a season, he was just RB47 overall, but he was 12th in consistency in the games that he did play. He was 15th in consistency, better than Nick Chubb down the stretch in weeks 10 to 16. He was 17th in Foresight consistency. He had no top 6 upside, weeks. He was 34th in running back 1 percentage, but he was 9th in running back 2 percentage. And he's currently going outside running back 2. He's going in RB3 territory as RB27. Notable stats from playerprofiler.com. He was 4th in production premium, meaning that, putting every NFL running back last year in every average NFL running back scenario, there was only 3 guys in the league that did better than him in that advanced next level metric. Kareem Hunt was 29th in running back receptions in just 8 games. And there's been reports all offseason about how Hunt is working with the wide receiver group and will also see some time in the slot. In PPR formats, even if Chubb plays a full season, Hunt is entirely flex worthy every single week and has top 5 upside if anything happens to Chubb. I have 0 issues with his price tag, especially if you take Nick Chubb early. And I was joking with Jay earlier because I wanted to make the comparison at this point about Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara a few years ago. I think you have 2 legit bona fide RB1s in the prime of their health and the prime of their capabilities in their career, in an offense now where Stefanski targeted his running back 7th most last year, and he runs the crap out of them. So I think there's plenty of room for everybody to eat. And I definitely agree that Nick Chubb's going to be an RB1 and Kareem Hunt should have no problem sliding in there as an RB2, especially if he's getting additional PPR work in the slot.
So, we talked about Chubb earlier, and, I definitely agree. Like, I do really like Kareem Hunt as a handcuff, somebody that you would want to, especially if you're able to, depending on your roster construction, how your draft falls, if you can add him to secure Nick Chubb, that is excellent. But I don't know, when I looked at the notes first going over, I'll just blame it on me being out in my car and it started getting dark and, I didn't see what his ADP was. But for me, for a guy that I'm looking to have, I do not want him as my RB2. So he would just be a flex or a bench guy. I do not like the 5th round price tag, but that's me. Like, I don't think I would want to pay a 5th round price tag. I have too many other spots on my roster I'm trying to fill. I do get it to a certain degree. I do think he'll have, like I said, standalone value. I'd want to start him week to week, but from a flex position. and certainly as somebody who would secure my Nick Chubb early round pick. And guys,
Steve, in the 5th round, you could do your RB1, your RB2, your wide receiver 1, your wide receiver 2, and draft them as your flex in the 5th round.
Still,
I'm just saying,
that's fine. And I look at it more from like, I love Raheem Mostert at that price point, but I'm probably taking Kareem Hunt over the rest of that group. So where running backs are being drafted as a premium, as always, the group he's going with, I favor him out of most of the guys going around him in drafts currently.
Hey, I guess I'll say this. I do agree with both you guys. When I do look at Mark Ingram, Mostert, Swift, Akers, I definitely like Hunt. However, I just feel like this is, and you guys, I don't know if you agree or not, but in the 5th round, at this point in time, early to mid 5th, you can get such fantastic wide receiver value that if you do load up on your running backs early, that it's like, well, why even take these guys this early? But yeah. You do make a valid point though, and I can't disagree with either one of you. When it comes to running back 27 price tag, I just got a little bit too caught up on the round. I got caught up on the 506, but yeah, right. The running back 27.
Well, let's see how you feel about our next player's price tag, and that is Buckeye J.K. Dobbins. I'm sorry, future Hall of Famer J.K. Dobbins. He is currently being drafted as RB32 with the first pick in the 7th round. A little bit cheaper price, Steve. He's going behind Ronald Jones and James White and in front of Marlon Mack and Jordan Howard. Very, very interesting group of players going around him. As I had mentioned before, the Ravens have the 6th ranked strength of schedule for the running back position and the 5th ranked offensive line. Right now, his aggregate projection is RB46. Now, in Total Foresight, we have very limited metrics for rookies because, frankly, they have not played in the NFL. So we are going based off of projections, schedule, things like that. And right now, his schedule and his offensive line and his projections yield an RB19 ranking. So let's go over some stats. Per Dane Brugler's 2020 draft guide, Dobbins was just the 2nd running back in OSU history to start his season opener as a true freshman. And as a 3rd-year junior, all he did was set the single-season Ohio State rushing record, joining Archie Griffin as the only Ohio State player to rush for 1,000 yards in 3 different seasons, and was the only OSU player to do it in his first 3 seasons. In 2019, he had 301 rushing attempts for 2,003 yards for a 6.7 yards per carry average. He had 21 touchdowns and added 23 receptions for 247 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air despite one very bad drop in the national semifinal game. Still haunts me. All right, I got off. I see, look what I did. I lost focus for 1 second. In 42 games at Ohio State, he totaled 725 rushing attempts for over 4,400 rushing yards and better than a 6-yard per carry average, 38 total touchdowns. He added 71 catches for 645 yards and another 5 scores. According to Dane Brugler, quote, overall, Dobbins is built for the pro game and runs with outstanding vision, decision-making, and open field elusiveness, displaying the innate qualities to be a reliable 3-down starting running back in the NFL, close quote. Mark Ingram, who turns 31 in December, likely will not be on the team next season. Thus, it's not a matter of if, but simply a matter of when Dane Brugler's overall rookie RB1 takes over one of the most dynamic rushing attacks the NFL has ever seen. While we're expecting usable production from some running backs going around him like Rojo and Jordan Howard, drafting J.K. Dobbins could wind up winning you your league in 2020. And if you're in any sort of keeper or dynasty format, you definitely need this guy on your roster this season.
Amen.
Hey.
Yes. And that's what I mean. You're absolutely right. When you said, hey, Steve, how are you going to feel about this guy? He's cheaper. Yeah, I like the 701 on somebody who can overtake the backfield, who can have a higher stake in a very dangerous backfield when it comes to fantasy football and scoring upside and potential. And Ben, when you alluded to it earlier, so the Baltimore Ravens were the only team in the entire NFL who had 3 different individuals with 20 plus red zone carries. Now, granted, one of them was a quarterback, but still. Exactly. Gus Edwards. I'm sorry. That is not J.K. Dobbins. And again, I cannot state this enough. Having a quarterback like that with that running back talent and that line, just, man, how valuable every single red zone touch and goal line touch will be. And we know that Dobbins is going to get his. It might not come immediately, and I think it will come more immediately than others do. And Ben, I think you feel the same way. Yep. But it's going to get there, and it's going to get there fast. And at the 701, like, sign me up all day long. I want him in my flex.
I'll tell you what, week 1. J.K. Dobbins in college played several years of read option football, so he knows what it's like to play with a mobile quarterback.
Exactly.
And can work perfectly in that scheme.
Beautiful in that RPO game.
Yep.
And I feel, this is silly to say, I feel a sense of loyalty to Mark Ingram. I know they're going to feel a little bit of sense of loyalty to Mark Ingram. Well, so I will say in mocks, when I take him, I am usually getting him around the 8th round, and I am taking him as at that point in single QB tight end formats, being super disciplined and waiting on those positions. Yeah. So at that point in the 8th round, I am now looking at my bench. And when I'm looking at my bench in the 8th round, forget the 8th round. Let's talk about the 701 where he's going right now. Look at the guys going around him. Rojo, we all expect, could have a very nice season, but there's still rookie Keyshawn Vaughn. There's still Dare Ogunbowale that catches passes. There's still Shady McCoy that catches passes. James White, I think he's going to be a sneaky little play this year, guys. So. PPR with Cam Newton usually goes well, just saying. Marlon Mack, it just came out today that he is going to be, quote, the starter, but they could go with the hot hand at any time. So if Marlon Mack does a good job of keeping, continuing to earn his touches, he could be viable. Jordan Howard could be viable. But my point in saying all this is I don't think any one of those guys are anywhere close to having the league-winning potential in 2020 redraft that Dobbins does. It may be until about week 4 or 6 before you really confidently flex him. But once you do, that guy could be an instant RB1.
Doesn't this strike you as like the Philadelphia Eagles backfield last year where they had a highly drafted running back and it just took several weeks to get going? They had an established runner in Jordan Howard. And you could get an injury
just like they did with Jordan Howard. You get an injury with Mark Ingram and boom, J.K. Dobbins takes it over.
Exactly. Now, my only concern is if this season is somehow shortened, then maybe does he not get do you not get the run on him? But that's really it, and we all hope that that's not the case.
Well, guys, I do have to say really quick, one of the things I've heard is like one of the biggest kind of marks against J.K. Dobbins heading into this rookie season as far as scouts are concerned is like, one of his knocks is, well, he might not be patient enough of a runner. He might press the line too soon. That isn't going to be a concern for the Baltimore Ravens in this Lamar Jackson offense. So it's just like, that's why they reached out and got that kid. So, it's just like, I don't know, Ben, I have a feeling you and I are going to end up like trying to fight over who's going to overdraft this kid in our record.
Probably.
I regret this podcast.
Well, to round out an exciting group of players in the AFC North quarterbacks and running backs episode, we have a guy that I do not think is a snoozer to end this podcast. I'm dead serious. I'm talking about Pittsburgh Steelers rookie running back, Anthony McFarland. He is currently going very late, RB 58, 1309, behind Nyheim Hines, behind Carlos Hyde, in front of Chris Thompson and Darrington Evans. Like we said, Pittsburgh Steelers have that very nice combo, second-ranked running back strength of schedule and ninth-ranked offensive line. This is Dane Brugler's rookie running back 15. He was drafted by the Steelers in the 4th round of the 2020 draft. Per his draft guide, in 2 years as a Maryland starter, he wasn't all that prolific overall in college, totaling just 239 attempts for over 1,600 yards, but a 6.8 yard per carry average, 12 touchdowns, plus another 200 receiving yards and an 8.3 yard per reception average and another receiving touchdown. However, he was very efficient, explosive, and in the lone 3 games where he was given 20 plus touches, he logged 132 yards, 210 yards, and 298 yards in those 3 games. Per SI.com in June, Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin was quoted as saying, quote, "Man, his talents speak for themselves. His stop-and-go quickness, his game-breaking ability in terms of his ability to make big plays, we're excited about it. We feel like we got some talent in the backfield, but we feel like he's got a skill set that's a little bit different than the guys that we've got in our backfield in terms of his speed and open grass ability," end quote. Mike Tomlin is not a fake coach speak guy. Mike Tomlin is one of the most direct and honest coaches in the NFL, and that quote told me a lot about Anthony McFarland. This sure sounds like a guy they have big plans for, and if Big Ben is actually healthy, then look out, because over the past 5 years, aside from 2019, Big Ben has averaged 39 pass attempts per start. An explosive guy like McFarland only needs 5 of those targets per game to garner 75 targets over a 15-week fantasy season. Plus, if Connor misses any time, which according to playerprofiler.com, #1 injury probability that there is, that's a pretty good chance. That's even more volume for McFarland. At this point in drafts, I think this guy is a sneaky solid dart throw who has been finding his way on the end of my bench in every single mock this entire offseason.
Man, Benny, I love reading your notes on these late round guys. You do a fantastic job of finding just good quotes and good stats. And I've heard a lot of stuff about McFarland here and there, and it hasn't really gotten me excited the way some of this stuff does. Like, man, you're absolutely right. I mean, late round dart throw. I mean, we're talking about Nyheim Hines, Carlos Hyde, Chris Thompson, Darrington Evans. Why?
Depending on what they say about Chris Carson's health, Carlos Hyde's the only guy I'm even considering touching at that point. Yeah, well, otherwise, it's Anthony McFarland all day, and it's not close.
Well, and absolutely right. And take him late. You have to have guys on your bench you're going to cut anyways, right? So it's like, take him. See what happens week 1. See what his usage is like. See what Mike Tomlin dreams up for him. And he might be somebody that you're like, man, I might have a trade piece on my hands if I don't want to put my starting lineup, or someone maybe I want to start flexing. But
Steve, you mentioned it. A few years ago, James Conner came out of nowhere and was free for people, wasn't even being drafted. Now you've got a team with a second-ranked strength of schedule at the position and a good offensive line, and that same old running back who has injury problems. And now another guy who really was unheralded. It would just be the most Steeler thing ever that he comes in and becomes a productive running back. And, his stats from college aren't overly impressive, but that's because he just wasn't used enough. His total career stats, his total career carries in college, he had 239 carries. J.K. Dobbins had 300 last season. So you see the usage, and when the guy does get volume, he gets into the game and can really produce. So he has the ability, and Ben, like you said, man, I have immense respect for Mike Tomlin. And to your point, he is very direct. He doesn't mince words. And he's also not going to pump a guy up for no reason. And he was very specific in his compliments about Anthony McFarland. So I'm with you. You know, when you get that specific and you're not just saying, you know, the general platitudes, it really does tell you something.
It does. And check this out. From the standpoint of the similar, potentially dynamic offense / respected head coach, a nice offensive line, a low ADP,
right?
Super hyper efficient skill set type, and the gadget type of role usage. This guy, to me, has Alvin Kamara written all over him from his rookie season.
Oh, man, and he went late in drafts.
He went late in drafts, and he was sharing time with running backs and still able to be efficient enough to be an RB1 that season. And, I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility of his range of outcomes for that to happen for Anthony McFarland. And if you're wrong, it's a penny stock. Right. You can cut him at any time. Right. No harm, no foul. But if you cash in on that lotto ticket, man, look out.
I'll tell you what, man. Great job to end this episode. Love it. Nice work, Ben.
Thank you, sir. And you know, Steve wanted to steal a little bit of my thunder before Friday, because Steve wanted to be on special remote location because he knew that this Friday I will be on special remote location. I will be at the Foresight J homestead, but we are going to be Corona responsible and still socially distanced. He's going to sanitize bomb the RV that makes him RVJ. I will be potting and crashing in that very RV that night and potting from that location this Friday, 8 p.m., AFC North, wide receivers and tight ends. Can't wait.
Man, I'm so jealous, guys. And I do have to say, thanks for having me on and putting up.
Thank you for joining us. Be sure to visit us, as always, at fantasyforesight.com. Use the links at the bottom of the page to find us across social media, including Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and wherever you pod. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you next time.
Perfect. Well, at least he got to say goodbye.